Hey, what's up? We're drawing closer to the 2022 NBA draft with 30 NBA teams preparing to select players they believe could become future stars. I'm Jorge Sedano, and joining me to break down who's on the board, ESPN draft expert Jonathan Givony, ESPN front office insider Bobby Marks, and our ESPN NBA analyst Kevin Pelton. So, guys, the question is very simple. Who's number one?
So I personally have Chet Holmgren number one on my big board. That's who I would take number one if I were the one with a pick. But I don't think that's the way that things are going to shake out on draft night. Being at the NBA Combine, going to all these pro days, just being around, all the GMs, coaches, decision makers involved in that pick, it really feels like Jabari Smith is the guy that Orlando is locked in right now. I've spoken with them. They say that they are going to go through a process here. They're going to bring in Smith, Holmgren, and Paolo Banchero to their gyms, get to know them better as people. I'm not sure how much basketball activity they'll be able to do with them, but I think they're definitely, considering the merits of all of them, and they want to make sure that they go through a long process to make sure that they end up with the right choice. Ultimately, I think Jabari is the one that they take. They were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the NBA last year. Jonathan Isaac hasn't stepped foot on an NBA floor in 2 years. I think they really like Wendell Carter, and I think they want to see what he can do with more floor spacing. There's some question marks about, him and Holmgren together, and probably Jabari, at the four, with the lack of shooting they have is maybe a better fit positionally. And I'm not sure what this counts for, but I've also been told that their head coach, Jamal Mosley, is also a huge fan of Jabari. So I think that's the direction they go in. And, there's a lot of merits there. Jabari Smith, just turned 19 years old. He's the best shooter in this draft. He plays with incredible intensity. He's a great fit. I mean, people rave about his work ethic, his character. So a lot to be said for Jabari Smith as at number one.
I think it's interesting because in some ways, Jabari is kind of playing against type for Orlando. It's been observed that one interesting trend, everyone knows that they've kind of favored long, athletic players, a lot of focus on wingspan, but also at the same time, it's been observed that they've ended up taking a lot of guys who are higher in my projections than they are maybe on draft boards. Franz Wagner last year was an example of that. Chuma Okeke a few years ago, Cole Anthony in between those two selections. And Holmgren is the guy that I have number one in my projection. So if they were going with that trend, it would sort of be him. But I think Jonathan's right that, sometimes when you do collect a group of players like that, you have to go against type to get someone who complements them. And you look at the biggest weakness for Orlando with this group, it's been shot creation. And who's going to be the guy among these very solid, supporting caliber players they have. And Jabari projects more to be that kind of centerpiece focal point offensively than Chet Holmgren does.
So, well, and I think too, I'm sorry, George, I think it's interesting too, as far as how much separation there is from the two, from these two players here, as far as I think if Smith or Holmgren, there was, this generational type talent where, it's a no brainer, no matter where fit is going to be, then you take the player and then you kind of worry about moving Wendell Carter, or maybe you do something like that down the road here. And I think for me, I think I would probably be leaning more towards Chet Holmgren, just because I think you can play him now. I think the upside is there. But I certainly understand as far as for a player like Jabari Smith, based on where they are from a lack of shooting. And certainly, as Jonathan said, the desire to kind of pair him up with a player like Wendell Carter.
KP, when you mentioned shot creation, do you have any concerns about Jabari Smith shooting 45% for two? You talk about long, athletic. I mean, I think more about Chet Holmgren. I think he's a much better athlete than Jabari Smith. Personally, he's much longer. Do you necessarily see Jabari as a guy that is a number one option potentially in the NBA?
I think he potentially is. I mean, I think part of that is shot selection. Like his long two, his ability to get that off is almost so effortless that I think that He didn't focus as much on, high value shots as he could have. I mean, you turn some of those into 3-point attempts at the NBA level. He was hitting as high a higher percentage of his threes than he was long twos. You add the extra point to that, suddenly those become really valuable. My comparison for him, I don't know what you think about this, Jonathan, has always been kind of LaMarcus Aldridge. He's a little more, perimeter oriented, probably more of a ball handler than Aldridge is, but I think that kind of guy who you can play through at the elbow and maybe even out to the 3-point line.
Yeah, no, that's a good comp. I think that looking at Jabari, do people want to see him maybe develop more towards that small forward range, maybe like a Chris Middleton, something like that, but he'll have to become a better ball handler, a better passer, a better decision maker, because he really did struggle to create, high percentage shots for himself. Auburn, had some issues at the, late in ball games. Everybody always put it on their guards, but I think part of that is Jabari just isn't that type of guy right now who you throw the ball to and you say, go get me a bucket right now. But he just turned 19. So obviously he could definitely develop into that later in his career.
So as much as I think, you all seem to agree that Chet Holmgren should be the number one guy, Orlando's not going to go with the Tri-Towers. We have seen obviously plenty of teams go with the Twin Towers in the past. But so with that said, Bobby, I'll start with you. Is Oklahoma City then, if Holmgren is there at 2, are they looking at anybody else, or is it just Holmgren at that point?
I think it's just Holmgren right now at that point. I mean, even to the point where you're not even looking to move up to number 1 to take him, because at worst you're going to get Jabari Smith staring at you if Orlando does take Chet Holmgren. It may be different than prior years where, you see someone that, you're picking 3 and you want to get to 1 and it's going to cost you a draft asset. I think Oklahoma City's sitting in a really good position. They're certainly a priority in their front court, based off with, you went Josh Giddey and then you have Gildress Alexander, Lou Dort, in your backcourt here. So I think the Thunder are staring right at Chet Holmgren. I don't think it should be a much of a debate between him and a player like Paolo Banchero. So yeah, I mean, Oklahoma City can just kind of sit back and see what Orlando does.
Well, look, we talked for months about the big 3 of Holmgren, Smith, and Banchero as the top 3 choices. But Jonathan, what are the chances someone else goes at number 3, right? Like maybe a Jaden Ivey or even Murray in that situation. What do you expect there?
The teams that I talk to don't expect that to happen. I've been told that Houston has definitely looked at that possibility of drafting Jaden Ivey, pairing him with Jalen Green. It would probably be the most athletic backcourt in the NBA, just in terms of, your ability to get out in transition and beat guys off the dribble. I mean, like those 2 guys are as powerful changing gears as any players in the NBA right now. And there's a reason why Jaden Ivey draws comparisons to Russell Westbrook. But at this stage, it feels like Houston is very comfortable with Paolo at number 3. That's the overwhelming expectation that I've heard around the league, that he's the pick. They've said from day one, they're open for business. They're, open to exploring trade opportunities. But I actually think that Banchero is a great fit for their roster. Pairing with Jalen Green, just another really dynamic shot creator who gives you a huge weapon, pushing off the defensive glass, operating out of pick and roll. I mean, there's a good case to be made that Paolo is the most skilled offensive player in the draft. And I think you figure out later on what type of players to put alongside him, Jalen Green, later in terms of the defensive side of the floor spacing. I mean, those are going to be some of the questions that those 2 face. But I like Paolo at number 3. And I think that, he's going to be a guy that, is really strongly in consideration as rookie of the year, potentially, if he goes there to Houston.
Kevin, now, Jonathan kind of alluded to some of that there, but how much will fit matter when it comes to these top 3 guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think Holmgren is maybe the more conventionally most difficult because of the fact that he just doesn't project as that classic go-to guy for a top 3 pick. And I think OKC would be awesome in that regard because you've already got a lot of that shot creation from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander there. So that's not as big of a need for them as it is for Orlando. I really like the fit of Paolo to Houston, as Jonathan talked about. And I think the reason why is, sometimes it's very important for players to go to places where kind of their weaker tendencies are discouraged and their best tendencies are played up. I think about Jason Tatum going to Boston, where he wasn't necessarily allowed to just play a lot of ISO jab step like he was doing in college early in his career because of the fact that he had such good players around him. Now, it's not necessarily the talent in Houston, but it's kind of the analytics focus there that I think could be really important. Last year, according to Second Spectrum, Paolo took almost as many long twos as he did threes, and he shot 40% on those, which is pretty good. But you compare that to even with his subpar 3-point percentage, he had an effective field goal percentage of 51% from three. So you push those shots back a couple of steps in the NBA, and I think all of a sudden he becomes a lot more efficient as a scorer.
Bobby, let me ask you this. Do you see maybe potentially some other teams trying to trade into the top 4? Do you think the Magic, Thunder, Rockets, or even the Kings will entertain offers in this scenario?
I think, when you look at teams outside of the 4 teams, I think certainly keep an eye on Washington, who's sitting at 10, where they are. Priority is a point guard. So do you move up? But what do you have to move up? That's the big thing. You already owe Oklahoma City a first, which was from Houston as part of that Westbrook for John Wall swap a couple of years ago. Is it going to cost you some of maybe your former lottery picks that you've chosen a year before? New York sitting at 11. They've got that Maverick pick that's next year, but that pick probably will be in the 20s here also. So you have some of your young picks. I think when you look at the top 4, the look on Sacramento's face the night of the lottery when they moved up to 4 to be in that position, to know that they potentially could have there's a big gap between picking at 4 and picking at 7. And they are in a kind of, it's hard to say they're in a win now mode without a win now team. So you kind of have to, I think you have to be careful as far as being cute with the draft, as far as moving up, but unless a team comes in at, Houston's at 3 and offers, a really solid 1 for Houston to move back to, let's say 5 or 6, it's hard for me to think that any one of those 4 teams are going to move out of that spot.
Jonathan, you mentioned that, you felt that Houston would take Banchero, even though they have said they're open for business. But I guess let's just say, for argument's sake, that they are open for business. What's the worst case scenario for Paolo?
I really just don't see him sliding past 3. I think if somebody does trade up, it's to get him. He's a guy that a lot of NBA teams still think is the number 1 player in this draft. It's not a consensus here that Chet or Jabari are 1. I think more people have that than not. But I do think that Paolo has a lot of fans. I mean, what he did in the NCAA tournament, leading his team to the Final Four, just putting Duke on his back, against some of the best defenses in college basketball. I mean, that Texas Tech game was one of the most impressive games any player has had all season long. And so to talk about a 6'10" guy who can play pick and roll, create his own shot, shoot off the dribble, and really find teammates off a live dribble too. I mean, there's not a more valuable skill to have in today's NBA than that. So I think if somebody moves up to 3, it's for Paolo. And so I think that's his worst case scenario.
All right, let's move on to the post-combine buzz, let's call it. And Jonathan, obviously you covered all that. Who do you think is the player that helped themselves the most in the pre-draft events? Yeah,
so I attended around 25 pro days. I was a big part of this pre-draft process this year. Saw around 150 guys. People love to bag on the pro days, but if you cover the NBA draft, you have to be there. You look on the sidelines and you see presidents and NBA head coaches, owners, this is a big part of the pre-draft process. So if you're not there, I'm not exactly sure how you're covering the NBA draft. The guy that stood out the most to me is Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. This is a guy that started the draft process as a projected mid-second round pick on our board, and he came out number 20 in our mock draft that came out today. He played in the 5-on-5 at the NBA Combine. He measured extremely well, 7'2" wingspan for a guy that played a lot of point guard in college. And then, it came out in his pro day, and actually in all of the dog and pony stuff drills, he didn't look very good, but he decided to play 3-on-3, which is kind of unique to see in a pro day. And you could really see him come alive in terms of his skill level, his competitiveness, his feel for the game, handling the ball, creating for others, and just some of the things that he did defensively. You take it with a grain of salt because it's a pro day and it's designed to make guys look good. But NBA teams were really impressed by that. That's what everybody's looking for in today's NBA. And just real quickly, two other guys that I think deserve a mention. Jaden Hardy, I think, helped himself at the Clutch Pro Day. That was a really unique scene. You walk into the gym and you see, some 2023 lottery picks working out, and Derek Lively and Nick Smith, Chris Livingston. You see John Wall roaming the sidelines, Trae Young, definitely one of the more interesting pro days. And they put him in a situation to really accentuate his strengths. His body looked great. He actually missed the NBA Combine because of COVID protocols. And so this was an important showcase for him in front of a huge audience of NBA people to just really show people his shot making ability, his deep range, the energy that he brought, and the scoring instincts. When you turn on the NBA playoffs and you see Jordan Poole, really being Golden State's second best player, and you say, hey, why can't Jaden Hardy be that? He started the year third on our board, and now he's there available there in the 20s somewhere, and teams are starting to think, hey, is that guy are we sleeping on this guy? And then very quickly, his teammate at Ignite, Marjan Beauchamp, also I thought helped himself. He's, changed his shooting mechanics from the G League season playing with Ignite, and really shot the ball very well off the dribble, and just his size and length at 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan, the energy he brings, I thought it was impressive. So, you take it with a grain of salt the pro days, but NBA teams definitely value them.
I thought to add one player to the guys Jonathan mentioned from being at the Combine that really helped himself, not maybe at that high of a level, but Kenneth Lofton Jr., who, he clearly still needs to get in better shape, I think, to, be more attractive to NBA teams. But even, losing some weight from the college season, you see his just ability to play out there. He's got a very high basketball IQ, extremely skilled for his size, and one of my favorite players to watch without question. So I think he kind of got himself more in the mix than he had been at the end of his sophomore season.
Bobby, let me ask you this in regards to, these guys have been talking about guys who've helped themselves. Who's a player that maybe NBA front offices have seen now and gives them some pause?
Well, I think it certainly has to be Shaedon Sharpe, just because of the unknown. We saw him at the pro day in Chicago, did not play last year at Kentucky. So there's the body of work compared to even players who play for the G League Ignite, the ability to take him with the 5th pick or the 6th pick. He'll likely go in that top 7 range here. As Jonathan knows, and Kevin, huge upside here, but when you're picking that high, you certainly have to get it right. I think the one guy, and when just with talking with teams, and it's not more of like as of the concern, but more of where they see him being selected, is a guy we saw in Chicago is Andrew Nembhard, where it's kind of that safe pick, right? It's that safe player that you can, the upside is probably not as high as some other players, but can you take him in the 30s and know that maybe you have a third point guard at a low risk here? Or do you run the risk and maybe he falls to you in the early 50s? I don't see that happening here. And I think that's the question that some teams are going to debate, as far as some of those teams that have multiple seconds. Do you package them to move up and take that player that is the safe bet compared to, let's face it, this free agent class is not great. So you're not going to find that, that second or third point guard there.
Jonathan, who's the guy that can make kind of this meteoric rise into lottery territory?
Yeah, the guy that I'm going to have my eyes on the most on draft night is Dalen Terry from Arizona. 19 years old, 6'7", wing, who played a lot of point guard at Arizona. One of the better defenders in this draft. and has really just blown people away in interviews and, just in the pro day setting, just with the energy he brings, the competitiveness, the character. People just gravitate to this kid. And I think the more that people study his game film, they wonder, is this the Herb Jones of this year's draft? And are we going to let this guy slide to the second round? So he's the guy that I've gotten the most phone calls on from around the NBA, people asking, where do we need to get to draft this kid? And it's gotten to the point that teams in the late lottery and the mid-teens are wondering, we thought at one point about maybe trading back to get him, but he might not be there. So maybe we just take him, at 14 or 16 or wherever it may be and live with it, because we believe in this guy's ability to develop his outside shot and to become a hungrier scorer. And once that happens, the rest of his game is there. He's an incredible defender. He can really pass. He's 19 years old. I mean, he's got the length and the size and everything we look for. And he's obviously has a character. So, he hasn't officially announced that he's staying in the draft, but I expect that to happen. And I think he's going to go pretty high on draft night. That's what it feels like to me.
Gotcha. Kevin, which player has the widest range, I guess? Someone whose projections have kind of the biggest disparity between the scouting reports?
Yeah, I look at Tari Eason from LSU as someone who really pops in that regard for me. With Traquavion Smith withdrawing from the draft, he's up to 5th in the stats only version of my projections now. Jonathan has him mocked, I believe, 18th at this point, so just outside the lottery, and someone who was in a 6-man role, which is unusual for an NBA prospect, although we see it usually at Florida State. Patrick Williams a few years ago being an example of someone who did rise despite playing that 6-man role. It just extremely productive on a per minute basis at LSU. And, I don't think you necessarily look at him as someone who's having star potential, but is someone who can just come off the bench, make plays, help you in that regard. Kind of similar to maybe someone on Memphis's bench. A lot of those guys had really strong statistical projections for where they were drafted.
All right. So let's move on here real quick because Bobby, the Lakers and the Clippers both had picks that ended up that they ended up dealing that ended up becoming lottery picks. So the Lakers would have been number 8. The Clippers would have been number 12. I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Which LA team is feeling worse about surrendering that pick at this moment?
Well, it's interesting. It's like, I want to say the Lakers, but at the end of the day, they wound up winning a championship because of it, right? I mean, They did win a championship. We forget about that. Although, some could say it was in the bubble, but they still won a championship. And that was the cost of it. I don't think any of us thought that it was, when 2022 rolled around, it was going to be the 8th pick in the draft, probably not even the Pelicans. So I guess I'll say the Lakers just because of the infrastructure. You'd love to have the 8th pick in the draft right now based off the year they just had. The infrastructure is not there compared to the Clippers, where you're going to have Kawhi back this year. You're going to have a healthy Paul George. There's more to work there as far as with Ty Lue. But I'll say the Lakers, but with an asterisk because there was a championship that did come along with that.
Yeah, look, totally agree on that. I just would add to the Clippers moving forward, at least. It feels like this season, they did a really good job of developing what will end up being future role players. It kind of reminds me of kind of what maybe Golden State went through last year to some extent. And the Lakers definitely need cost-efficient players at this point, or, at least on relatively good contracts. So in retrospect, you're right. Championship wins it all. And you do that deal probably 9 times or 99 out of 100. But man, right now they could use some young player to infuse that older aging roster. But Jonathan, let's talk about the teams that have those picks. The Pelicans at 8 and the Thunder at 12. Who do you believe they could have there that can make an impact?
I think the Pelicans, with the situation they're in now, they need to draft probably the most ready player that's, ready to come in and step into the rotation and help them, win a playoff series. That's, bring Zion back, and, what's the best player for that? I've heard the name Ben Mathurin being thrown around a lot there. 6'6", 6'9" wingspan, only 19 years old, but was an All-American this year at Arizona. Pac-12 Player of the Year, has a ready-made NBA skill already with his ability to shoot coming off screens, but he's more than that too. He's terrific in the open floor. He's really improved his ability to get himself downhill, finish at the rim, make simple passes. There is still a lot of growth that you'd like to see there in terms of his ball handling ability, his defense, but there's a lot to work with. So I think with Ben Mathurin, you look at New Orleans and they're straddling the line between an upside pick and somebody who can come in and help them right away. I mean, they've got a stacked rotation of, stars and contributors, stars, I say, with Zion back in the fold, which we're all assuming is the case. With Oklahoma City at 12, I think this is the highest upside pick they can make. They're just going to look at who slides out of that top 10, who's there for them, and, make a determination of, which player is going to be the best one 5 years down the road. You talk to Sam Presti and he always says, the NBA is a bunch of role players, and the differentiator is the stars, like the guys that are top 50 players, and there's no point in drafting a role player, so let's go and take a swing for the fences and find a guy that we think, can be an all-star in 5 years from now. So we have Ousmane Dieng mocked to them, 6'10" wing from France who can really handle the ball, pass, shoot off the dribble. Started the year very, very slowly in the Australian NBL, but really got better as the year moved on to the point that he was his team's best player. And, the upside is, extraordinary, for him, just as he continues to fill out his frame and, develops his spot up shooting ability, his ability to, hold his own defensively against bigger and stronger guys. He's big enough to play the 4 in the NBA. So he's someone that we have mocked to them, but I could also see them taking a look at a Malachi Branham from Ohio State, another one and done freshman, a Jeremy Sohan. I think people are studying him. They're saying, is he the next Draymond Green, Tari Eason, who KP mentioned, another high upside guy. So those are some of the guys I could see them looking at.
And I think it's interesting because for both of these teams, these picks are almost a bonus in different ways. In New Orleans' case, it's like you never imagined when you put the top 10 protection on that pick a year ago that you were going to get it. And just everything has kind of played out the Pelicans front office's way for like 6 months here since they made that CJ McCollum trade. He's been terrific for them. Herb Jones and Jose Alvarado developing into such cornerstones for them. And now you get this pick on top of it. I agree with Jonathan that I think Mathurin makes a ton of sense for them. They really enjoyed watching him play in person at UW with Arizona this year. And with OKC, it's a bonus because you've already got the number 2 pick. You've still got all these future picks coming down the road. It's okay if you swing and miss on some of these picks, to Jonathan's point. And I think that's what gives them kind of the freedom, the flexibility to go that highest upside player.
I mean, this is like perfect for Sam Presti too, though. I mean, the Dieng pick, I actually think would be the Presti of Prestiest picks for Sam Presti in that situation. But all right, we're going to start with Bobby, then we'll go Jonathan, and we'll go KP at the end. One bold prediction. Bobby, go.
Paolo Banchero goes at 3, but not with Houston.
Okay.
Do I have to give the team?
I mean, if you like, feel free.
I'm going to say Portland at number 3.
Wow. Okay. Jonathan?
The Knicks trade up to 4 and take Jaden Ivey.
Oh, okay. KP?
Well, everyone went way more specific than I would say. I was just saying. I was just going to say the 2 top 10 picks change hands on draft night, which I think would be, it doesn't happen very often.
No, absolutely not. So, all right. Well, it's going to be fun. No doubt a ton of interest at who's going to go number 1 and obviously across the board after that in the lottery and beyond. And look, there's always diamonds in the rough, late first rounders, guys in the second round. You mentioned a guy who could be the future Draymond Green. There's always a ton of interest when it comes to the NBA draft. And of course, it's June 23rd on ESPN and ABC. I'm Jorge Sedano. Thanks to Jonathan Givony, Bobby Marks, and Kevin Pelton. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.